Right, welcome to this special explainer. Today, we're basically conducting a financial autopsy. We're looking at what happens when an absolute titan of industry, a firm woven into the very fabric of the British state, collapses under the weight of its own hubris. On the 15th of January 2018, Carillion PLC, which was this massive, multinational facilities management and construction giant, went into compulsory liquidation. And it wasn't just a bankruptcy. It was a systemic failure that sent absolute shockwaves through the UK economy, exposing some glaring flaws in how public infrastructure is managed, audited, and outsourced.
Okay, let's dive straight into this. Diluted or just plain inept? Now, that scathing assessment didn't come from some angry tabloid column. It actually came directly from a joint parliamentary inquiry into the collapse. UK members of parliament looked at the evidence and concluded that Carillion's leadership was either completely disconnected from reality or just entirely incompetent. They presided over what was called a rotten corporate culture and a relentless dash for cash, basically systematically misrepresenting the firm's financial health to investors, regulators, and the government itself. But you've got to ask, how on earth did such a colossal deception go unnoticed for so long?
Section 1. The Fall of a Giant.
To really get your head around this collapse, you first have to grasp the sheer monumental scale of the company. 450. That is the staggering number of vital public sector contracts Carillion held globally right at the time of its demise. We are literally talking about everything from building major hospitals to providing school meals and even maintaining defense sites. So when the firm collapsed, an immense 43,000 jobs were suddenly on the line worldwide, including over 18,000 right here in the UK. So where did the rot start? Well, the seeds of destruction were actually sown in their growth strategy. Carillion decided to shift from traditional construction into support services, and they did this through a series of really aggressive, debt-fueled acquisitions. If you look at their buyout history, they snapped up Mowlem in 2006, Alfred McAlpine in 2008, and the green energy firm E.ga in 2011. But these deals left the balance sheet severely burdened. They ended up accumulating a massive $1.57 billion in what accountants call goodwill, which is essentially the premium you pay over the actual tangible asset value of a firm. And here's the kicker. Even when these acquired divisions heavily underperformed, take E.ga for example, which bled $260 million over 5 years, the Carillion board absolutely refused to write down that goodwill. It was a vital mechanism for them to just maintain the illusion of a strong capital base.
Section 2. A House of Cards.
So you're probably wondering, how exactly did they maintain this facade of profitability for so long? The answer lies heavily in something called percentage of completion accounting. Now, for multi-year construction projects, this method allows a firm to recognize revenue and profit based on optimistic estimates of the work completed, rather than the actual cold, hard cash in the bank. And Carillion's management? They routinely use this as window dressing. The parliamentary inquiry actually found they overrode internal controls to present a wildly optimistic view of project profitability, just blatantly ignoring massive cost overruns and even booking revenue for work that clients hadn't even agreed to pay for yet. But, of course, reality always catches up with the spreadsheets eventually, and when it did, the decay was incredibly rapid. Just look at this timeline. In March 2017, they published accounts showing a perfectly solvent company and even announced a record $79 million dividend for their shareholders. All good, right? Well, just 4 months later, in July, they drop a bombshell profit warning alongside an $845 million write-down. By September, their half-year results revealed a catastrophic $1.15 billion loss. Fast forward to December, lenders were yanking their support, and by January 2018, the High Court issued a winding-up order. In under a year, it literally went from a rosy record dividend to total irrecoverable ruin.
Section 3. Engineering the illusion.
To keep the wool pulled over the eyes of lenders and the public until the absolute very last minute, they weaponized a financial tool known as reverse factoring, or what they called their early payment facility. Here's how it worked in practice. Carillion's banks, primarily Santander, would pay suppliers early at a discount. Carillion would then repay the bank months later. Sounds helpful, right? But the strategic value for Carillion wasn't about helping its suppliers at all. It was about creating a massive hidden debt loophole. They ended up classifying nearly $500 million of what was effectively bank debt as mere trade payables or other creditors. Ratings agencies later pointed out that this systematically misrepresented their true borrowing levels to the entire market. What's really fascinating here is the stark mathematical gymnastics in their 2016 results. They proudly reported a positive operating cash flow of £115 million. Brilliant. But if you pop the bonnet and strip away the artificial boost from all that hidden bank debt, the underlying operational cash flow was actually negative £85 million. The business was fundamentally hemorrhaging cash, yet on paper it looked like an absolute triumph. Section 4. The oversight failure. Now, a deception of this magnitude doesn't happen in a vacuum. It requires enablers, and the resulting sanctions read like the rap sheet of a very, very cozy club. KPMG had actually been Carillion's auditor since 1999, quietly pocketing $29 million in fees over the years. Well, the Financial Reporting Council later found their audits were seriously deficient. KPMG got hit with a record $21 million fine for very bad audit work, having missed glaring red flags left, right, and center. But it gets worse. In a separate tribunal, it came out that KPMG staff actually forged documents and backdated meeting minutes just to mislead regulators. Unbelievable, really. Audit partner Peter Meehan received a 10-year ban, whilst former Chief Financial Officer Richard Adam was banned for 15 years for the reckless preparation of accounting information. And whilst the executives were busy protecting their own bonuses and paying out some £554 million in dividends over 8 years, they completely neglected their core obligations. £800 million. That is the staggering estimated liability they left to the UK's Pension Protection Fund. The directors basically treated the pension scheme with utter contempt, prioritizing short-term shareholder returns whilst leaving 27,000 pension members facing significant cuts to their hard-earned retirement benefits. Section 5. The devastating fallout. Let's step away from the boardroom for a moment, because the real-world consequences across the country were severe. Take the Royal Liverpool and Midland Metropolitan Hospital projects, for instance, both delivered under the Private Finance Initiative. When Carillion collapsed, work on those sites stopped immediately. And when new contractors eventually took over the Royal Liverpool site, they uncovered severe structural defects caused by Carillion's sheer negligence. Things like cracked concrete beams and unsafe cladding that cost $50 million just to replace. The costs ended up ballooning by hundreds of millions, draining the taxpayer, and essential NHS facilities were delayed by half a decade. Beyond the crumbling infrastructure, there was a devastating human cost to all of this. 780. That is the number of construction SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises, that were pushed into insolvency in early 2018 directly because of Carillion's failure. You see, Carillion treated its supply chain as an involuntary line of credit, stretching out payment terms to the absolute breaking point. So when the giant finally fell, it crushed hundreds of smaller, hardworking businesses right beneath it.
Yet, despite all the flashing red warning signs, the government acted with what has rightly been described as shameful inertia. We tend to call this the HS2 paradox. Just 21 days, literally 3 weeks, after Carillion issued a massive £845 million profit warning and their CEO resigned in July 2017, the UK government went ahead and awarded them £1.3 billion in contracts for the HS2 high-speed rail project. The government had essentially become a captive customer, blindly feeding a failing giant simply because the whole procurement system was completely flawed.
Section 6. Lessons from the abyss. So the crucial point is, did we actually learn anything from looking into the abyss? Well, this disaster forced a major structural reset. The government basically had to abandon its dangerous obsession with outsourcing based solely on the lowest price. And this culminated in the 2020 construction playbook, which mandated that public procurement must now focus on actual outcomes and social value. There is now rigorous financial monitoring, requiring living wills for major contracts to ensure vital services can actually continue if a supplier goes under. Risk allocation has to be balanced and manageable, and crucially, large government contracts now demand mandatory adherence to the prompt payment code. All of this is designed to protect the SME supply chain from the kind of bandit capitalism Carillion deployed. The collapse of Carillion remains the definitive case study in the sheer fragility of public outsourcing. It showed us exactly how a culture of recklessness, hubris, and greed can fester when auditors, regulators, and government officials simply look the other way. Which leaves us with this final, provocative thought. Can financial engineering and a relentless dash for cash ever truly outrun the fundamental laws of cash flow and professional integrity? For Carillion, the answer was a resounding, devastating no. The question now is whether the wider corporate world has truly absorbed that lesson. Thank you for joining me for this explainer.